Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the second episode of Clock Management. I am Kevin Tompkins. This week, we have a fantastic guest, one that will go to extreme lengths to get you any news on DeAndre Swift. You know him at Football Guys. It's Mr. Dave Kluge. Dave, my brother, how you doing?
Doing good, man. How about yourself?
Great slate of games, best slate of games that I can remember on a very long time, top to bottom. Just wall to wall, Giants, Cowboys, Broncos, Colts, like you name it. We kind of got a stinker with Sunday Night Football, but you know, you got to take some of the bad with a lot of the good that we got in week 2.
Yeah, my takeaway when I was looking at the slate on like Thursday, like getting ready for the week, I was like, there are like 6 games that feel like they should be primetime games that are just buried in this afternoon slate. And they lived up to it, man. That was one of the best days I can remember watching football in a long, long time. Yesterday was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. And, you know, we've come a long way here from the 2022 Allen Lazard wars. You know, myself and yourself, you know, going to battle on the old social media front. So
had you been on Twitter, you know, over the last couple of months? This year it was the Olamide Zacchaeus wars, you know, a very similar guy to Allen Lazard, a guy who had done, you know, not too much early in his career, but the opportunity was there for the taking, and way more involved in this Bears offense than I think people expected him to be.
Yeah, we'll talk a little about that, you know, certainly, because I know, obviously, you know, Bears fan here, we got some inside knowledge. We'll get into that. But first, you know, I had it kind of at the bottom of the, you know, what we're going to talk about today. But Dave, what's the most interesting thing that you saw in week 2? I know you haven't gone through like all the games yet, but, you know, we've certainly gone through enough with everything in the last, like, you know, 12, 24 hours here. What's the most interesting thing you saw in week 2?
You know, this might not be like the most interesting to everybody, but it really piques my interest. I was a huge fan of Wan'Dale Robinson when he was coming out of Kentucky. You know, I remember watching the Citrus Bowl game and it just like blew me away. 10 catches, 170 yards. And I was a little bit concerned that maybe his size wouldn't translate to the NFL. But he looked really good his rookie season and showed some flashes that piqued my interest. And then obviously had that ACL tear. And since coming back from that, he just hasn't been in a good role. There's been a lot of volume in that role, but it's just been this dink and dunk kind of extension of the run game type of role. And that's so different than what we saw in Kentucky, where he was very much so a vertical threat that could win on deep balls and despite his small size could come down with contested catches. And we have seen a big change in usage from this year. His average depth of target has more than doubled from last year. We saw him running these nonstop vertical routes yesterday. Obviously had the big touchdown as well. So yeah, you know, it might be kind of a nerdy thing to care about, like the wide receiver 2 on the New York Giants, but this is a guy that we had looked at last year as being like a very high floor, low ceiling flex player. And now if he starts running more vertical routes, we can really see him blow the top off that ceiling. So a guy that was available in almost 60 leagues as of this morning. If he's on waivers, go out and pick him up. And if you've got him, I think he moves from kind of the wait and see approach on your bench to somebody you can confidently put into your flex lineup next week.
Yeah, that's funny because, you know, we're going to talk about some wide receivers as a pass catchers. Now, I was actually thinking about that, wanted to add him in there. So I'm really glad you said something about that because probably the most disrespected 130 targets I think we've seen in a really long time in drafts. Like people are you know, you're scrolling through the Jalen Cokers and the Xavier Legettes and you're coming across Wan'Dale Robinson in your draft app and you're doing the Ron Burgundy, the I don't believe you meme.
Yeah, right.
Pretty much looking at it like, yeah, I want to see you do that again. I think, you know, we love targets. You know, we Jarvis Landry comes to mind as like maybe the next like disrespected target earner that like, you know, didn't really get up there in terms of like public perception. But, you know, Wanda, I'm still a little bit skeptical, but yeah. I think he was certainly rosterable even before we saw him get 8 targets and then 10 targets. And then we saw him get a lot of like the Slayton stuff going deep. That was like Darius Slayton's work. So to see him get that, I think is incredibly bullish for him. And the Giants are sneakily condensed too, because you've got Malik Neighbors, you've got Wan'Dale Robinson. Theo Johnson hasn't really emerged as anything more than like a situational type target earner. And then obviously Slayton, we know what he is at this point. And the Giants literally only used 3 wide receivers. It was Slayton, Robinson, and I think on the active roster. So, you know, we know that this is going to be condensed a bit. And, you know, Russell Wilson probably bought himself another week or 2 with at least this performance against the Cowboys. So as far as like a flex play, I think you can do a lot worse, especially in PPR. I mean, maybe you downgrade him a little bit in half PPR. And if you're still playing standard, So I mean, the yards count, the yards and the touchdowns, that's still 20 points in standard last week. So yeah, definitely glad that you
Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah. Definitely wish I had him. I mean, I was done drafting wide receivers at that point after taking like 7 or 8 in the first 10 rounds. But Wandale, definitely one of the better, at least in the first 2 weeks, because a lot can happen. Who knows if Jackson Dart gets in there, and then, we have to kind of, reinvent the wheel all over again with how these targets shake out. But very interested. And, let's just go into the pass catchers here. Let's talk about your guy, Odunze, who Odunze had an awesome week 2, couple touchdowns there. I am very excited about kind of potentially changing in the guard here. 3 touchdowns last 2 weeks, averaging 9 targets, 6.5 receptions, about a little over 80 yards per game here in the first 2 weeks. Do you think that because I know DJ Moore runs a little bit of a shorter A dot, we've seen that in the last season and a half here, where he's kind of been a little more of the designed target earner there in Chicago. But as far as like the what you're looking for in a top receiver, obviously he was drafted to be as such. Rome Odunze looks like the real deal here for the Ben Johnson offense for Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I do my rest of season rankings, and that's something that I start working on Sunday, usually finish this afternoon. But I've got Odunze ahead of DJ Moore in my rest of season rankings, and I think we've seen enough at this point. You talk about it, there are so many like manufactured touches to get the ball to DJ Moore. That's what we've seen in Carolina. It's what we saw last year as well. That isn't really a tenet of the Ben Johnson offense, the way that it has been in other offenses that DJ Moore has played in. And I worry that he's just, frankly, not a good fit in this offense. His best stuff is when he's kind of working off script, working back to the ball, finding the soft spots and zones. And Ben Johnson's offense is predicated on timing, being at your spot, being exactly where you're supposed to be so Caleb Williams can put a ball on you. That's what Rome Odunze does well. So I also have a little bit of a fear that DJ Moore isn't playing quite as much out of the slot as we had hoped. We hope that he can kind of be that supercharged Amon-Ra St. Brown in this offense. Doesn't seem like that's happening. We're seeing a mix of Olamide Zaccheaus and Cole Kmet. Rome Odunze is getting some snaps out of there as well. So I think what we've seen from Odunze over these last couple of weeks is him developing into the player that they hoped they'd be when they took him inside the top 10 of the NFL draft. It's a guy who can make contested catches, a guy who can make plays after the catch, can win inside and outside. They've been moving him around the formation quite a bit. Contested catches were really his bread and butter in college, and he's making them now. I was checking this morning, only George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, and Ricky Pearsall have more. And for guys with 4+ contested catch opportunities, Stephon Diggs is the only wide receiver with a better contested catch rate than Odunze. Of course, we're looking at a small sample here, but do like to see that he struggled with that a little bit as a rookie, and now maybe the game's slowing down for him. He's not getting quite as scared off by the talent anymore. So Odunze, looking at him as a top 30 receiver for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe there to throw him in there. And, we're looking at the rest of the offense there and, talking about guys that, Ben Johnson wants to get on the field, guys that are going to be, getting their spot. That's Olamide Zaccheaus, at least. You kind of figure he's got to be a placeholder right now until Luther Burden kind of gets his feet wet. Is that, that kind of corollary? Or you think it's maybe something else with Burden as to why he's not getting on the field, at least immediately? I mean, 81% in the slot for Zaccheaus' snaps, only 12% of routes for Burden. So I think we always knew it was kind of going to be a little ramp up to getting more work. And then you can kind of throw that in. Loveland's getting a little more work as well on the field, only 1 target, no catches, but probably a little more learning curve in the Ben Johnson offense for both those rookies.
Yeah, and I think with Burden and Loveland, like even you talk about, the snap shares from yesterday, doesn't tell the whole story because that all came like very late in the game when they were down 31 points. So, I mean, they were both just kind of non-factors going forward. I'm already saying like in shallow redraft leagues, if you want to cut Burden and cut Loveland, I don't blame you. And if we see some signs of life later, then maybe like I'd rather open up the bench spot now and then get in the bidding war if I need to in the future. But I am concerned. It seems like this slot role, from what we've heard, it's funny that you talked about Jarvis Landry because he had that role for a while. And, we can go all the way back to like Brian Hartline as the slot receiver in a Ben Johnson offense.
That's
but
what you hear.
Yeah. But what you hear more than anything about this role is that it's a very cerebral role. And we know Luther Burden is a great athlete, but I don't know if that really matters so much. Like they talk about what Zaccheaus is so good at doing. is running a choice route where he's just going to find the soft spot in the zone, that they're going to give him multiple options of where he can go, and it's up to him to make that decision. And I think if you could manufacture a touch to get the ball in Burden's hand, he can do fun things with the ball in his hand, but I don't think he's got that cerebral element yet where he can play that role. So I know a lot of people are just like waiting for the bottom to fall out under Zacchaeus. I think he makes for a reasonable flex spot, as long as you can hold him. And that might be through the end of the season, as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, the public perception on it was Zacchaeus is just like, I'll forget about him. Like, he's gonna, the public, you're drafting Burden, in drafts in August and July, with the thought that Zacchaeus might be a placeholder, but, there might be a little bit more meat on the bone from, what it seems like with the Ben Johnson offense and getting these rookies kind of integrated to everything going on there. But let's shift away from the Bears. Let's talk about one of the biggest kind of risers here. And even he was kind of going in the beginning of the third round, but I think we have to kind of change our perception a little bit. And that's Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's put together 2 awesome games last week. Yesterday, 9 targets, 8 catches for 103, 88% of the routes. We know that the Seattle offense is going to be a bit hit or miss in a given week. I mean, we saw Cooper Kupp have a really bad week 1 and then bounce back with a 7 for 90, but I don't think we're making any mistake here who the top pass catcher is in Seattle, but I think it's going to be more volatile than most. But I think JSN has the opportunity here with his skill set and going into year 3 here that he can overcome some of the inefficiencies of Sam Darnold, maybe of some of like the game script offensive line stuff. What's your read on JSN after 2 weeks? And is that somebody we need to maybe shift into like maybe the where you would take like guys in like the second round, like, how are you thinking about JSN?
He's my most drafted player this year. I had him on 40% of my best ball rosters. He was my pre-draft wide receiver 7. So I've already moved him up a couple of ticks. I've got him as my rest of season wide receiver 5. I've moved him ahead of Drake London. I've moved him ahead of Nico Collins. I mean, I just love this guy, but really what it is, it was a lot more to do with the offensive surroundings than it was with JSN, who, first of all, I think JSN is a great talent. And I think we forget how good he is because broken wrist his rookie season behind DK Metcalf in year 2. But we saw the little flash last year when DK Metcalf had to miss a couple of games. But for me, more than anything else, it's just what Clint Kubiak does with his leading receivers. And if you look last year, whether it was Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, or even Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who had like 240 yards and 3 touchdowns over a 2-week period, he schemes up his guys to get catches deep downfield where they can make plays after the catch. So we saw it last year in New Orleans. In 2023, Brandon Ayuk had his best year of his career while Clint Kubiak was the offensive coordinator there. Justin Jefferson, big year 2 breakout came while Clint Kubiak was there as well. And these are obviously good players, but that's what Clint Kubiak does, is he schemes up offenses to get his best players in space where they can make plays after the catch. And right now, JSN, 44.2% target share. Well, he's 3rd in the league in yards per route run. So we're looking at elite usage and elite efficiency. Sure, there's some shortcomings with Sam Darnold, but I'm not really too concerned about it. Like, they are going to force feed Jackson Smith-Njigba in this offense. And he's a good enough player that I think finishing inside the top 5 shouldn't surprise anybody at all.
No, I'm with you there. And I've had to kind of readjust because I kind of pushed JSN a little bit down. Probably into like later in the third with like the Mike Evans and Terry McLaurin's, just because I was not sure of how this offensive line was. I mean, Gray Zabel, boots on the ground, and NDSU here, a big get in the first round, and I think can solidify that line a bit, at least for Sam Darnold. But knowing you're getting a little long on the tooth Cooper Kupp, you had some questions about the tight ends. Obviously, they got rid of Noah Fant, they traded away DK Metcalf, no Tyler Lockett. So a lot of kind of changeover where you had to figure out who your guys were going to be. You didn't really have to figure that out with JSN. It was just going to be what was the state of the offense. That was my big concern with that. And, I think JSN is proving that he's kind of independent of a lot of the surroundings there where it almost doesn't matter, that he can still go out and produce. Despite, Cooper Kupp could be up and down. We'll see what happens with Torrey Horton. Very favorably scored a touchdown, 130 air yards last week. Yeah. So, and then AJ Barner's been like solid. And then, the run game, depending on the week, Whether it's Charbonnet or Walker or maybe both. Yeah, that's
I'm glad we're not talking about that because I have no idea what to make of this backfield right now.
Yeah, that's about where I'm at. As a guy who, trust me, I have enough Charbonnet to fill a small watercraft. Yeah. So so I'm definitely in a JSN. And one guy I wanted to talk about too, Zay Flowers. Now, I was very, very heavy on Zay Flowers just because of looking at the offense. Baltimore offense is going to score a lot of points. One of the most efficient offenses in football. Lamar Jackson. The run game is going to open up a lot for the passing game. And the surroundings with, Mark Andrews maybe losing another little step here. They brought in DeAndre Hopkins, Rashad Bateman, like a lot of the same guys. They added some of the, veteran pieces there. But Zay Flowers seemed, kind of head and shoulders above everybody else. And I think we're starting to see that. He's always earned targets. He's always been efficient. But I do think we're starting to get a bit of an incremental breakout with Zay Flowers, where we're thinking him as a guy is like, what if he gets the touchdowns? What if he gets just a little more volume? I think we're starting to see a little bit of that now, where I think we have to raise him into like the top 15 wide receivers going forward.
Yeah, and I'm looking right now. I can't get him inside my top 15, but he's darn close. I've got him at wide receiver 22 right now. And I just love the career path that we've seen from Zay Flowers so far, because, at Boston College, he was just like a deep threat guy, and that was pretty much it. And then when he first came into the NFL, the first half of his rookie season, it was all of these short targets and allowing him to create after the catch. And I was like, wait, this isn't what Zay Flowers does. Then the second half of his rookie season, they got rid of those short targets and they just started feeding him on deep balls. And then in year two, we saw both of those things kind of come together, where he was getting the short targets, he was getting the deep balls, but the usage wasn't that great. And now we see that same thing where he is getting used all over the field, short, deep, middle, inside, outside, everywhere. But now he's doing it on a 42% target share as well. Now I expect that to regress somewhat, but Rashad Bateman hasn't looked good through these first couple of games. Mark Andrews looks like complete dust. They've got no Isaiah Likely out there. They have no choice but to force feed the ball to Zay Flowers. So, I think finishing this year with like a 30% target share while maintaining the efficiency that we've seen so far isn't out of the question at all. And that could easily push him into a top 15, top 20 finish.
Yeah, it might have killed me just a little bit to see Devontae Walker get 2 touchdowns yesterday. Also,
and Tylan Wallace
and DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, that was a tough beat. Yeah.
See, playing the Lamar Flowers in DFS definitely didn't help. Seeing those guys score and just can I have one? Like, I'll take one and maybe a 25-yard, just get me over the 100-yard threshold there. Yep. But yeah. I definitely like what I've been seeing from Zay Flowers, and I think we're seeing, an incremental breakout, because he's improved a lot of his peripherals, yards per target, everything like that, from year 1 to year 2 now to year 3. And, I think the surroundings definitely are going to help, further that this season. But it all can't be positive as much as we want to be positive about some of these opinions about these pass catchers. I look at a guy like Josh Downs, who I think with Tyler Warren there now, we know the Shane Steichen RPO stuff. We've seen it with Gardner Minshew force feeding Michael Pittman. We've seen it with Anthony Richardson, kind of doing that with Downs last season because Pittman was hurt with a back injury. But now the RPO stuff seems to be going from Daniel Jones over to Tyler Warren. That seems to be a very, fruitful thing. It's changed kind of our perception of the offense. So I'm going to combine a couple things because I do want to talk about the Colts offense kind of in its own thing, but we can get it all out of the way here, talking about Josh Downs, and then we can move on to Warren. But I think Josh Downs has kind of got a nail in the coffin here with Tyler Warren. I mean, he's still going to be out there in the slot. And I think, obviously Alec Peterson, Adonai Mitchell being out, running routes and stuff like that, I think doesn't help anything. He's never going to get on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, but that's just another target, and one that's pretty dominant in the targets that he does get, to just kind of push Josh Downs down the pecking order here.
Yeah, and I mean, that's always been the thing. Like in Shane Steichen offenses, we don't see a lot of 11 personnel, and we know that's the only way Josh Downs is getting on the field. And now they can kind of run this pseudo 11 personnel with Tyler Warren in the slot, where he's taken about 1/3 of his snaps so far. So you kind of hit the nail on the head here, where I think that Josh Downs is just kind of the odd man out, unfortunately. Pittman and Pierce are just locked into their roles as outside receivers. Tyler Warren isn't coming off the field, and it makes sense. Like, so much of what Josh Downs did last year was, like you said, the RPO RPO stuff where they could just get him the ball, allow him to create after the catch. But I know if I'm an NFL head coach and I've got the choice between scheming up a touch for Josh Downs, who's what, like 5'10, 185, or Tyler Warren, who's like 6'6, 260, can rumble through, make catches through traffic, run through a defender's face. Yeah, I'm going to want to scheme up touches for that tight end as well. So I think this kind of pushes Josh Downs pretty far down. I mean, he did pull 8 targets last week, but there's just such little efficiency with it. So I think he kind of falls into that like boom bust wide receiver 5 discussion, which you got to be pretty desperate to put into your lineup. And, come injuries and bye weeks, then it might look a little bit better. But I do want to shout out real quickly your buddy Andrew Cooper. Did a show with him a couple of months ago where we were talking about some of our favorite values in drafts. And he brought up Michael Pittman and kind of like put me back in my seat where I was like, Michael Pittman, what are you talking about? And then kind of forced me to re-look at it. And I was like, that's right. Michael Pittman, when he's not dealing with a back injury and a thumb injury, is a pretty good football player. So shout out Andrew for getting me right on Pittman before the season kicked off.
Yeah. And look, as a guy who has kind of been on the other side of the pit, look, there's good people on both sides of the Michael Pittman discourse, but I would drafting Michael Pittman. Like, I think where he was going, like, in drafts like this season,
wide receiver 58 or something. And that was basically Coop's response. He's like, all of the downside is baked out of the cost. Like, you're getting a guy for free in like round 14, and started to a little bit. But yeah, there was a point where it was just such a good value in drafts.
Right. You're not drafting him in the 3rd round like you've been in the last couple seasons. Like, where you're drafting him at probably there's not much room to grow with his upside. And now you're getting him at just bargain basement prices. Yep. But yeah, looking at the offense, we talk about Tyler Warren, and that's a guy I was a little bit skeptical about with his collegiate profile because it took, this to his 5th season. And then, he couldn't really get on the field too much. He had Theo Johnson and Brenton Strange ahead of him. So, as dynasty players, you kind of look at that and you're like, well, that's a red flag. Why couldn't you produce if you're going to be talked about like Brock Bowers? Because that was a lot of the, prevailing narrative was Tyler Warren's going to be Brock Bowers-esque or close to that. And, it's one thing to be Brock Bowers and be an 18-year-old on a national championship team and dominate everything with multiple NFL, Adonai Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, Pickens, etc. But then it's another thing where you're getting beat out, not getting on the field with tight ends like, Theo Johnson and Brenton Strange, who are not world beaters, good tight ends, NFL players, but so that was where I had some of the kind of disconnect with the Tyler Warren stuff. And I drafted him a little bit, but not a lot. And, I had to go say it on, Blue Sky yesterday. I was wrong about Tyler Warren. It took 2 weeks. It took 2 weeks of what we've seen on the field where he looks like a grown ass man in this offense. It honestly has changed our perception on the whole Colts offense now.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, this whole offense looks good. And like, we've talked about it for like 5 years. Like, oh, the Colts team is just a tight end away. And then they just like never drafted a tight end. And then they finally draft a tight end. Everything falls into place. It's like, wait, are you telling me this was the answer all along? Like, yeah, like this is, turns out a tight end really, really does help right the ship in Indianapolis.
Oh my God. Who knew that, not giving 20% of routes to Will Mallory was going to open up everying.
Remember Jelani Woods? We thought he was going to be the guy to unlock the offense. I mean, it's been an arduous 5 years for anybody that was trying to look at the tight end in Indianapolis.
Yeah. Back to like Jack Doyle we're looking at here, but with single, one tight end to rule them all, and that's where we're at with Tyler Warren here. So yeah, definitely intriguing to see what's going to happen with, with Daniel Jones now, who's probably the front runner for comeback player of the year right now in football. So definitely interesting. And then let's look at, I'm sorry, Andrew Cooper, please use your earmuffs if you're watching this back. Evan Engram, where, look, we know Sean Payton's MO. Sean Payton loves to get everybody and their mother out on the field, multiple tight ends, multiple running backs, multiple wide receivers, not giving a lot of real estate to like one guy outside of Cortland Sutton. And even, looking at some of the stuff from yesterday, could that possibly be in jeopardy now with Sutton? Now we got to worry about him a little bit. But for Evan Engram, the thought was that he could be the second target, that he could get on the field 75 to 80% of the routes, and we're just not seeing it. 6 targets combined last his first 2 games, 4 catches for 33 yards. 42% routes and 58% routes. So it's always trending up a little bit, but you have to be concerned because Evan Ingram was like a top 10 tight end drafted. And now he's barely getting on the field because you have to make sure you get Adam Troutman involved and Lucas Kroll on the field. I think that's, that's pretty evergreen. I mean, anytime you get Lucas Kroll on the field, I think you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same guy who's pulling RJ Harvey off the field to get the ball to Tyler Bidet, but this is just what Sean Payton does. Like, I don't know why we're confused about this, but I tweeted it out today, and I know people don't want to hear it, but Evan Ingram, he's droppable in fantasy football leagues. Like, if you're still holding him beyond this week of waivers, that's sunk cost fallacy. And I know there's like concern like, oh, well, he was on the injury report. Well, he logged 2 full practices leading up to Sunday's game and still just played 42% of the snaps. Through the first 2 weeks, 37.8% of the snaps. I mean, it's just time to move on. And there was that weird conversation where they were talking about him in the Joker role.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really know what a Joker role is, but when you think about the guys that have been in a Joker role, you've got Jimmy Graham, like just a man among boys back when he was doing what he was doing. I look at Alvin Kamara, like one of the slipperiest running backs in the NFL. I never saw the vision for like a 30-plus-year-old dusty Evan Ingram to be a Joker. Like, this guy has done nothing but play big slot for the last 3 years. All of his production was heavily usage based. Like, he was just getting force fed targets in Jacksonville. And now with better target competition, it's just not going to happen. And I think last week was really the nail in the coffin. Like, I was still holding on to hope after week 1, thinking maybe he was tending to that calf injury or something. But last week, Troy Franklin came out as the primary slot receiver and looked really, really good in that role. So any hopes that Evan Ingram could be second on the team in targets or the primary slot receiver, it's time to just abandon those hopes. Evan Ingram off all of my rosters after this week.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of know what we're getting into when you talk about Denver pass catchers, and I'll throw this. I mean, because Troy Franklin is going to be a guy that's going to be picked up in a lot of leagues off of waivers. And I wrote about it. It's going to be up on Optimus tomorrow, where you can pick him up and it's purely speculative, but like, buyer beware. We know what Sean Payton's going to do. We saw him jump up to 88% of routes. Obviously, he had a good game, 8 for 89, a touchdown. But that could all just be flipped in 1 week. Like, that's where you have the danger of a guy where you're going to see that, you're going to read the box score, see that bid, 15, 20% of your fab. And then it's, he's a guy that you're going to be dropping in week 4. Like, I think that's one of the range of outcomes. One of the very minute range of outcomes is that Sean Payton learned his lesson, which, I don't think we have to. Yeah, exactly. We're not hanging our hat on Sean Payton learning his lesson.
Didn't we see this last year? Remember, Devon Vele had like 20 targets over a 2-week period, and they're like, Sean Payton, he found his new Michael Thomas, and then he gets traded.
Pat Bryant, we wanted to make the new Michael Thomas.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, Sean Payton, for what it's worth, like, I love what he does as an NFL coach. I think it does kind of blow my mind how many coaches will have active players on game day that have just a 0% chance to see in the field. I do like that Sean Payton reaches deep into that personnel bag and gets everybody out there, but it makes for a disaster in fantasy football. I'm dead serious. Next year, I might just have like a no Sean Payton players allowed on my fantasy team rule. Like, it's just, this is what he does every single year.
Yeah, it's not great when you get, you want to make sure you get Adam Prentice on the field and Tyler Bidet, getting him, it eliminates all the headaches when you just have to cut out one of the 32 teams, even though, it's a pretty decent offense you want to get in on. And like, Sutton was like the only guy that you can maybe feel confident about. Now, his routes and snaps went down a little bit last week. And I don't know if that's going to be something that's going to be, I mean, they just paid the guy, but if that's going to be something that's going to be a thing moving forward, just another thing that we have to worry about in the Broncos offense. It's another week. It's another Monday of worrying about Sean Payton, but let's go into some of the contingent backfields, because I think we have a lot of very interesting things that maybe we change our opinion on here. Let's talk about Arizona, because last season it was very, you could kind of roadmap that with, James Conner was getting the bulk of the work. Amari DiMercato was getting a lot of third down stuff, a lot of long time down and distance, 2-minute drill stuff. And Trey Benson was kind of on the back burner for, he'd get some carries here and there, but you were never starting him. He was droppable by like week 7, week 8. But this season, Amari DiMercado's played, I believe, 1 snap, and that was yesterday, total in the first 2 weeks. Trey Benson has absorbed a lot of DiMercado's work to where I think we're going to be getting some standalone value out of Trey Benson with the obvious contingent play. And I think that bumps him up because I had, guys like Jordan Mason, Tyler Algier, Ray Davis as like contingent backs that you want to be in on, because if those guys got hurt, you're looking at probably high-end RB2s at worst with the utilization, with the strength of the offense, etc. So Trey Benson, has he become that guy for you where you would look at him as a higher-end contingency play now?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think he's a really good player. And like you said, like there might be some standalone flex appeal here. 22-12 in routes run over James Conner yesterday. Also at 6-1 in targets as well. So not something we saw a ton of in college, but really kind of locking in that passing down role right now, which I like to see. This was one of the few players that I had time already this morning to go back and watch the all 22 because I'm really just infatuated by Trey Benson. Just a big guy with game breaking speed. But man, he's kind of got that DeAndre Swift to his game where like he has the size and the power to run through a defender, but he would much rather just bounce everything. And you see it yesterday. He left so many yards on the field trying to dance around defenders rather than just dropping his shoulder. That's something that we saw early last year. They were giving him a decent amount of work to start the season, and he was just this habitual bouncer trying to get outside on every single run. And they benched him for a handful of weeks. And when he came back, he played much better football. And what we saw in week 1 was him playing good football, where he was getting downhill quickly. He was lowering his pads. He was doing all the things you want to see. And then yesterday, when they started giving him more work, it seemed like every single touch he had, he started dancing with a little bit more. So they're trying to coach that tendency out of him. And I hope that they can, because we see this all the time with these guys that have speed in college. That speed doesn't translate to the NFL. And where you might have been able to beat 3 guys on the edge in college, you can't do that when you're playing on Sunday. So still has a lot to like, the college production, the size, the speed, all of those sorts of things. And I do think that there's a path for him to just, on his own merit, take the job from James Conner this year. James Conner, this is the last year where he has guaranteed money on his contract. And if they can go this year feeling comfortable in what they've got in Trey Benson, they can move on from James Conner and save about $8 million next year. So I got to imagine that's something that's like in the back of their minds. Like if Trey Benson looks good, they can grow his workload a little bit. So big fan of the talent, but he just has some really frustrating tendencies that he hasn't been able to shake from his game yet.
Yeah, and that stuff I feel like that can be kind of coached out of him too. And he's been, pretty, he's admitted, I have a lot to learn in the NFL. I think that he did an off-season press conference and was talking about, I really had to grow up over this season, paraphrasing certainly, but at least it's somebody that's a bit self-aware of, life now in the NFL where, like to your point, he can't do what he did in college against everybody who's fast in the NFL. Like you just can't do that. But in terms of like contingent plays, I think Trey Benson is definitely one of the stronger profiles that we have, where he needs to be rostered in every single league at this point. He needs to be on benches, maybe not so much if you have a short bench or it's a shallow league, but he's a guy at the very least in those leagues that you keep in the back of your mind, knowing, maybe if I have a spot that's opened up or something like that, or I have to put a guy on IR, that's a guy that you bring, onto your roster where if something does happen, then you're pretty much guaranteed and at least a mid-range RB2 based on the workload. Because as we've seen, behind him, Amari DiMercado has basically been a special teamer this season after pretty much, losing that role to Benson. And that may have always been the plan. But, it's good to see that we're starting to get some kind of the building blocks for Benson to eventually take that role. And to your point also with the James Conner contract, he's a little bit longer in the tooth, over 30. We're going to be seeing Trey Benson hopefully getting some more run here. 11 carries to 3. It is what it is, but he ran more routes than Conner, I should say, just a little bit short on the snap count, but very, very encouraging signs. And then it may not take an injury. That's the thing. And that's one of the things that we talk about. It takes an injury, to kind of switch this up, and it may not take that. And I would say the kind of the same for the next backfield. We're talking about Jacksonville with Bashal Tutin, where I don't know if it's going to take an injury for him to kind of usurp Travis Etienne, because Travis Etienne's been pretty good the last couple weeks. But clearly trading Tank Bigsby to Philadelphia. They still want to use LaQuinn Allen for whatever reason is like a in that pass catching role. But seeing what we saw out of Bashal Tutin, seeing James Gladstone come out, after the draft saying this is a profile that we wanted to target in the draft, I think speaks volumes of how they view this backfield going forward. And, obviously this regime did not draft Travis Etienne. They don't have anything really tied to him. But Bashal Tutin, passes the eye test, and I think we're going to see a little bit of a ramp up in Tutin. Got a receiving touchdown yesterday. I think we're all excited about that, but I think there's a lot to be excited about with Tutin.
Yeah, and I think, people are going to see that receiving touchdown. I do think it's important to point out that Travis Etienne ran 22 routes to Tutin 6, so much more involved from Etienne. And, I had a long discussion on this morning's Waiver Wire show with Alfredo Brown talking about this backfield. I think the really easy thing to do is kind of look at 2024 Tampa Bay as the blueprint for the 2025 Jacksonville backfield. And people are so quick to say that Bashal Tutin is the Bucky Irving because that would be the best case scenario, and we'd love that.
Oh, yeah.
But I think Travis Etienne is a lot better than Rachaad White. So there's slightly higher of a hurdle for Tutin to clear to take that role. You also talk about an injury opening up the door for these other guys to kind of step in. And I think that a lot of times people think it needs to be like a season-ending injury to open up the door for that guy. That's not the case at all. Like last year, Rachaad White got hurt in week 6. That's when Bucky Irving had his blow-up game. And then they were just like, all right, well, this guy is just like too good to put back on the shelf. And his role just kind of grew and grew and grew from there. The last thing that I'll say about this, and like there's no data to back this up, but I think we look back at last year's Tampa Bay backfield with rose-colored glasses. I don't think it was quite as pretty as people make it out to be. They, of course, remember what happened late in the playoffs where Bucky Irving took over in weeks 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. He was very much so a league winner down the stretch. But there were so many false flags, for lack of a better word, throughout the season. It would be like we'd see 2 games where like Bucky Irving was getting usage, and then we'd say, yeah, and then we'd put him in our lineup and he'd get like 4 points. And then we'd see a handful of games where Rachaad White looked like he was taking it back over, and then we'd put Rachaad White in our lineup, and then Sean Tucker would have 17 touches. So I think it's just kind of Liam Cohen's tendency is to game plan around each opponent, and that is going to dictate where the running backs are going to get touches. He also has a hot hand approach. Like if you make some good plays, you're going to get rewarded with more touches next week. So I think that there's just this hope that like Travis Etienne is the running back 1 now, and 1 week we're going to see that flip-flop, and then Bashal Tutin is going to be the RB1, and I don't think it's going to be that clear cut. I don't want to be a wet blanket, but I'm putting a little bit of pause on like the Travis Etienne and Bashal Tutin hype because I think that they're both really good running backs. And I don't have a ton of faith in this Jacksonville offense to support 2 very good running backs for fantasy football. So I fear that there's going to be a lot of weeks where we're starting Etienne and we're starting Tutin and we're getting some really bad production on any given week. So I'm excited because I like what I saw from Tutin. I mean, that touchdown catch that he had was unbelievable. Like just caught the ball, 1 foot in the ground, cut past the defender, and was just like in a blink in the end zone. That's exactly what we knew Bashal Tutin could be. But I worry that in managed leagues where you have to make the decision to put one of these guys in your lineup, it's not going to be great. In your best ball leagues, congratulations. Like I would be thrilled to have Etienne or Tutin in best ball leagues.
Yeah. And this was always a backfield that people you'd want to target just because of the ADPs. Like we've seen, these are the guys that become, the league winners. Like we look at the James Conner stuff and like the battle with Chase Edmonds. And then you look at Kenneth Walker and Rashad Penny, picking the winner out of those guys. And, we've seen it throughout the year. Jonathan Taylor, Marlon Mack, like,
oh my God. I can't believe that was a thing.
I know, right? I mean, we want to go all the way back to Adrian Peterson and Chester Taylor. We can certainly, but look, those guys that are going a little bit further down. I mean, Taylor was like a 4th round pick then, but but still, that choose your fighter with like a lot of these running backs, and choosing like the later option can potentially win you leagues just because of you're getting the ADP value. But even if you took ETN, like you have to be very happy with what you have. Right. Over the first couple weeks. Like, I think you're happy no matter what side. I mean, if you pick the Tank Bigsby side, I think you're, the bank examiner has got a meeting with you in the next 15 minutes. Yeah,
I'm so mad at myself for buying into that too, by the way, because like in hindsight, it's so obvious that it was just like week 1 of the preseason, and they were like, let's hope somebody tries to take Tank Bigsby off of our hands. Like those reports were so obviously them trying to just build up trade leverage or whatever. And I feel like such a sucker for buying into that.
Yeah, it's funny because I took a couple head shares like very late, in some leagues, and thankfully they were like redraft where I could just okay, he's a cut, whatever. But I didn't really get into him in best ball or anything like that. I'm kind of glad I did not there, but the case was made. I mean, looking at Tank Bigsby's profile, like you could see a path to that, but I'm just glad that Liam Cohen did kind of clear the runway a little bit to where we now have, for the most part, it's one-on-one. I guess LaQuinn Allen's going to take a little bit off the top there with some passing work, and that's work that you hopefully, want to get to either one of those backs. But I think it's going to be a very interesting situation there. But let's talk about another situation, maybe a little more near and dear to you, is Chicago, where, we've got DeAndre Swift. But I think with Roschon was active, did not play a snap. Kyle Monangai has been solidly active for the Bears. And the running back 2 kind of situation, and something where DeAndre Swift only played less than 60% of the snaps last week, less than 40% of the routes, ran the same amount of routes as Monangai. So I think it's very interesting to see how Monangai has kind of worked in with Swift. And I know obviously boots on the ground, and you're very in tune with everything the Bears are doing. So what's your read on like how is this something where Monangai, we don't have to worry about Roschon, or can it get muddier? Like, what's your read on that whole, probably Swift is somewhat solidly at the top, but I think there's some murkiness underneath.
Yeah, this is one that I feel like, not to pat myself on the back, but I felt like I had a pretty good preseason read on this one. I was extremely bullish on DeAndre Swift in my rankings. Roschon Johnson, I had him down, I wasn't taking him outside of 26 round drafts. What we heard basically from June is like this staff was just gushing about Monangai, and it wasn't just like a one-off comment. Like Eric Bieniemy had good things to say about him, Declan Doyle had good things to say about him, Ben Johnson, Ryan Poles, like everybody that was a part of the Bears organization was just singing Monangai's praises. And Coach Speak Index, they track all this stuff. Roschon Johnson wasn't mentioned once this entire preseason. Like he was just a complete afterthought.
Got the Kamani Vidal treatment.
Exactly. Yeah. Like he just like, and like when they talk about the running backs, they would say like, oh yeah, DeAndre, Kyle, and the other guys, but people are still holding it down for Roschon Johnson. And yeah, I mean, we finally see him active in this game. And like you said, doesn't play a single snap. That being said, I will, slight pause with like the box score and the routes run, because so much of what Monangai did came up in cleanup duty. 85% of his carries came in the fourth quarter with Tyson Bagent. So I think the weird thing is that he was getting targeted though with Caleb Williams, and that's something that we know DeAndre Swift, that's one of his best qualities. Like he's got a lot of things that I don't like about him, but he's a great pass catcher, but they're pulling him off the field in lieu of Kyle Monangai on pass catching snaps. And that's what concerns me a little bit. But yeah, this is one where I think you're looking at DeAndre Swift as a top 20, maybe even top 15 if you're a believer in the talent, rest of the season running back. Kyle Monangai, I don't think there's going to be enough for him to have any sort of standalone value. But I think if something were to happen to Swift, they'd feel pretty comfortable just putting Monangai right in like that same role where he's getting 80% of the touches here. I think that would be Monangai up next. And this is one too where I could see it change a little bit. I think it's slightly mercurial because one of the statements that Ben Johnson made about Kyle Monangai is that he is a late season type of running back, which I thought was really interesting. He was talking about like when the weather gets cold and you need to play a more physical brand of football, that's when we want to lean on Kyle late in the season. So you look at these first couple of weeks, warm weather, indoors, that's where Swift can play his best. But I do wonder if like come week 10, when it starts getting cold in the Midwest, if we see a bigger dose of Monangai.
Yeah, I mean, the guy went to Rutgers, fifth year senior, put up two straight 1,200-yard seasons there. Yeah, definitely could play in the cold, certainly. So I think that's very interesting there to kind of get that read there with Monangai. Roschon is a guy I never really drafted just because he just felt like less than, just with all the guys that because we were all drafting, we all have the hopium for the Tosh Brooks and the Jarquez Hunters and everything. We want to get those lottery tickets. I feel like at that point we kind of knew what Roshan Johnson was.
I think with the day 3 guys, I'll overlook a disappointing rookie season and go back to the well in year 2. But if you're holding on to hope for a day 3 guy going into year 3, probably time to just give it up at that point. Like rarely do we see the day 3 guy break out in his 3rd year.
Right. And I think it's a thing where, because as like, the whole dynasty mindset of if you're a running back that's going in day 3, you're almost forgotten about, where I think we have to adjust some of how we're thinking about a lot of these day 3 running backs, because this is where teams, at least in the last couple seasons, are picking up a lot of their running backs. Obviously we saw that with Bucky Irving. We've seen that with just time and time again with a lot of these running backs. Manunga, I believe, was a 7th round pick.
Yep.
I think we have to readjust some of how we're thinking with a lot of these third day running backs that go in rounds 4 through 7, because
especially with the depth of this class. I mean, a lot of these day 3 running backs would have been day 2 running backs in just about any other draft.
Right. Certainly. So, and I do want to throw one more situation at you, because I did forget to actually put that in there. But based on yesterday, I think it's got to be mentioned at least, the New England Patriots backfield, which, look, we were all ahead of our skis drafting Travion Henderson. Certainly not me. No, I would never do that.
You fall in love for an early drafted rookie running back? No way.
A sexy running back like Travion Henderson, who scores a touchdown in the preseason and then in camp against the Commanders? No, would never do that. But look, this was always going to be the modus operandi of the New England Patriots, where Ramondre Stevenson was never going away. I think we kind of were hoping that Travion Henderson would get a little more work in week 2 and kind of get a bit of a ramp up. We actually saw some of his workload get downgraded just a bit, because Ramondre Stevenson led them in receiving, I believe, just looking through it here. But yeah, I think it was like 5 for 88 or something like that. But yeah, the fact that Ramondre Stevenson is this involved in getting more work, I think is something that we kind of have to temper some expectation on the Patriots running back. And with the receiving game kind of being up in the air with a lot of those players, the Stephon Diggs and the Kayshon Bouttys and stuff like that, the running game is going to be a big focus with not just the actual running backs, but with Drake May as well. So, I mean, nobody's dropping Travion Henderson. I think that's
no.
Not even close to doing that. But I think that Ramondre Stevenson gives us a little more confidence, at least right now, to throw him in as a flex, as long as he's getting some of this work, just knowing that eventually that's going to be more of a split right now than what we're getting in week 2.
You ready to tilt really hard? I'm not sure
Probably,
if you saw this on Twitter or not. You saw that big downfield catch and run from Ramondre Stevenson. Yeah. Did you see that was supposed to be going to Travion Henderson? And they said that there was just like some miscommunication and they put Ramondre out there, but they said that they had practiced that throughout the week to Travion Henderson and then had to sub Ramondre in last second.
Is this like the J.K. Dobbins helmet thing all over again?
I don't know if it's the helmet, but yeah, there was an interview with Vrabel from this morning where he came out and said that was drawn up and practiced to go to Travion Henderson, and they ended up running it to Ramondre Stevenson instead yesterday. So like that's just, here we are talking about like benching Travion Henderson and telling people like, be patient, don't drop him. If that one play went to Travion Henderson yesterday, the conversation today would be like, is he top 12 rest of season? Like how good is Ramondre Stevenson or Travion Henderson? But because of that one play, now we're just completely tilting. Yeah, I mean, this is one. And I briefly mentioned RJ Harvey earlier, kind of tongue in cheek about him losing touches to Tyler Bidet. But yeah, I mean, this is one where my rest of season rankings that I've been working on, as I mentioned a few times in this episode, Travion Henderson and RJ Harvey were both big fallers. And I'm not saying that you should drop them, but the hope is that these guys are good enough that they can carve out a role in training camp and then they could be that guy immediately. And we were drafting both of them inside the top 24 running backs. What we've seen through the first 2 weeks is that that's not going to happen. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't happen down the road, and things can change. They can get better. They can have some big plays that pushes them up the depth chart. Injuries can open the doors. Like we know how volatile the running back situation is. But, when we're looking at how workloads are being split up right now, there were guys last week David Montgomery, Tony Pollard, Kenneth Walker, Travis Etienne, James Conner, DeAndre Swift. I had all of those guys behind Travion Henderson. Now going into this week, I had to move Travion Henderson behind those guys because at this point, it's more of a hoping that he can take over that role, not just a matter of when will he take over that role.
Yeah, like looking at 11, going from 11 touches to 5, from week 1 to week 2 for Henderson is definitely tilting, certainly. But yeah, and that's the thing, is that we want to be so reactionary to like a lot of this stuff, where for what you said, if Henderson ended up getting that touch and took it to the house, we're playing trumpets, we're dancing in the streets, we're having parties, we're doing everything. We're hoping that, could Travion Henderson be the RB1 this season? Maybe not to that, but in my brain, maybe.
Still a very good player, and I'm not giving up hope yet, but a few of these dusty veterans that I was drafting, well behind Travion Henderson in the preseason are now ahead of Travion Henderson going into week 3.
Yeah, and Ramondre, for his credit, was like solidly efficient, on the ground, almost 5 yards per carry yesterday. And obviously the 5 for 88 is going to just boost him up even more so. So yeah, I think he's a perfectly like cromulent, viable, flex play. Maybe even a low end RB2 if you're like stuck, against it with some running back injuries. But yeah, I think they're going to have to. This Patriots offense right now is in so much flux with the passing game, with all the guys that they want to give routes to and not give like a normal like route share. I mean, Booty is like the only thing, and that's because he's the X receiver, right. And they're just mismatching. Stephon Diggs, Demario Douglas has been downgraded. Mac Hollins is getting out there after Chisholm was active and didn't play a snap. So Kyle Williams, they got out there for like a little bit, but. Yeah, I think this offense is going to have to be through the run, and I think that's going to benefit a guy like Ramondre Stevenson going forward. And then, it stinks to see Antonio Gibson get involved. By the way, the most fun part about week 2, the dueling return touchdowns between
so awesome.
Malik Washington. And after not seeing one, I don't think since like the Clinton administration, it was nice to see 2 back-to-back with Gibson and Malik Washington.
That's like when you're playing bags and, you hit one in the hole and you feel good about it. And then the guy next to you just like immediately neutralizes it. I've never seen that happen in a football game, but really cool to just like, you got to just be like riding cloud 9 after a kick return and then just have it immediately washed out. I mean, yeah, that's something I can't remember ever seeing.
That's Madden stuff. I mean, that only happens in Madden. That does not happen in the NFL. But yeah, we got through a lot here. Dave, I certainly appreciate you hopping on here. Let us know everything you're doing, where we can find you. And, I know it's pretty much centered around a couple things, but tell the good people.
Yeah, everything's over at Football Guys these days. You can find all my articles, rankings, rest of season, weekly, over at Football Guys. I'm doing 3 shows a week with Alfredo Brown on the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show, 3 shows a week with Jeff Bell on the Football Guys Dynasty Show, and then I've got my solo show as well, The Launchpad, 1 episode a week there. So staying busy this season, but everything can be found over at footballguys.com.
Awesome, man. Let's not take 3 years to get together and chop it up next time.
Yeah, I think last time was me, you, Coop, and Britt. We all did a show together. I want to say 2 or 3 off seasons ago. Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been, yeah. Let's shorten that up a little bit. But if you're into the chat also and you have questions, certainly go to the Optimus Fantasy Discord. There is a link in the description of the YouTube video. If you're not on YouTube, head over to YouTube, search Optimus Fantasy, go check us out there. Give us a like and a subscribe, as well as check out our Discord. It's free. A lot of us are hanging out there to answer your questions all day long, so go ahead and do that. We're gonna get out of here. Dave, again, great to see you, great to talk to you. I hope you're doing well with everything and doing some great work at Football Guys, and go check out everything Dave's doing. For Dave, I am Kevin Tompkins, and we will see you next time.